Detective Richard shook his head as he looked over the crime scene. These were the hardest, the ones that made him glad his wife couldn't read his mind. The culprit, Kyle Mann, had come home from work like he always did. He had ridden the number 3 bus home, gotten off at the stop outside his house at around 6:15, walked inside at 6:25. They knew these things thanks to the Ring camera the family had installed. And at 7:10, the neighbors had reported shots fired within the home. It appeared that he had shot his wife, Sylvia Mann, with his 9mm as she cooked dinner. They had found her in the kitchen beside the stove, with a pan of burnt something still smoking slightly. The sound must have spooked his 2 young daughters, Lydia and Chelsea Mann, 6 and 8, and they had attempted to flee. Well, Richard thought as he read on, Lydia had. He looked at the little outline by the base of the stairs, the one that had been done in the white tape the department used, and thought of his own daughter. Lydia was just about Margaret's age, and he supposed she would be forever now. The thought made him sick. So, Kyle had plugged his wife, shot his daughter as she came downstairs, and then he had gone looking for Chelsea. Chelsea, the youngest, had opted to hide. This had prompted a game of hide-and-seek that had lasted for nearly 5 minutes, before Kyle found her in the linen closet and killed her right there on the dusty floor. Richard hoped she hadn't looked up. He really didn't like to think of her asking why her daddy was doing these things before he shuffled her into oblivion. After that, as the blue and whites pulled up and probably shouted for him to come out with his hands up, he'd sat down in his office and used the same gun to end himself as well. Richard stepped over the tape on the stairs and headed up to the office and final resting place of Kyle Mann. The officers in the hall parted for him, many of them dipping their heads in respect. Richard, never Dick or Rick like some of the wits he worked with tried to hang on him, had been a detective for 15 years. He was slated to be head of special investigations in a year, would have already if not for the internal politics that seemed to rule the roost of any precinct. He was good, he had an eye for details, and he rarely missed the things that others sometimes struggled with. As he stepped into Kyle's office, however, he froze as his eyes found the painting hanging above the big bay window there. Kyle had been a man of taste, it would seem. These were no Walmart slab shelves, and no cheap furniture from IKEA either. The desk was mahogany, the bookshelves were the thick kind that made you believe they were homemade, and the chair he had decided to end his career in was an Adirondack, the big, luxurious kind with the high back that made you think you were getting fired if you came in and saw the back of it. The way that chair was positioned, Kyle would have had a great view of the picture that hung over the huge window that overlooked the well-maintained backyard. Grisly-looking thing, isn't it? Richard turned to find Detective Salvatore standing behind him, grinning like he'd already solved the case. Salvatore had been a detective for less than a year, but he showed a lot of promise. He'd been Richard's understudy for most of that year, and a few months ago the chief had said that it was time to let him fly. Richard respected the kid, but something about what he had said rankled him. For half a second, Richard had wanted to turn and belt the little shit across the face, but he had caught himself just before the impulse could overtake him. Actually, I find it quite beautiful. Talk to me, Salvatore. What have you found here? The two of them came into the study, Richard coming in first, with Salvatore following a step behind. Well, like I put in the initial report, man comes home, plugs his wife, plugs his kids, and then snuffs it in his study. Richard moved around the expensive chair to look at Kyle Mann, or what was left of him. Kyle had apparently decided that his skull was a little too musty and opened a window. It wasn't a big hole, but it had done the job. His jaw was ruined and open, the body sprawled out in death as They so often were. It had been quick, but the chair was likely unsalvageable. He was sure that some vag would consider it a throne when they put it by the side of the road, blood and brains notwithstanding. Richard tried to take these things in, but his eyes kept being drawn to the picture over the window. It wasn't some grand work of art, far from it. It reminded him of the pictures his mother had collected before she died, her own death no less inglorious than Mr. Man here. His mother had always been religious, and he had been raised in the backwood Georgia churches of Praise Jesus, the Lord is Mighty. But her own vice had been smoking. At her prime, she would smoke 2 packs a day, but even as her lungs failed her, she'd still manage a pack a day. She would slide the oxygen mask down before taking a puff, always asking Rick, always Rick, never Richard, to light it for her before passing it over. "The devil lies in that first spark," she would say. But the devil had been waiting in a forgotten spark one night as she slept in her easy chair, the cigarette forgotten. She didn't much care for art, but she liked the 7 or 8 paintings done by a local artist in the hollers of Tiger. Richard couldn't even remember the man's name, but he did these pictures of hell that always seemed to be too real, too lifelike. They were shadowy, they were dark, and they hinted at brimstone and sulfur fires that burned for 1,000 generations or more. If you looked at those pictures long enough, you would start to see eyes in the gloom. If you looked at them a bit longer, you would pick out the subtle lines of a horn or a mouth or a claw or some such thing. The longer you looked, the more demons you saw. And if you happened to wake up on the couch when the lights were off and the old TV was finally extinguished, you could swear they were moving. Once you saw those demons, you never unsaw them. Once you saw them, they were there forever, and Richard had believed that they would someday come get him one night and take him to the place in those paintings. Then, one night about 10 years ago, his mother's oxygen tank had erupted and bathed his mother, her lung cancer, and those hateful paintings in cleansing fire and sent all of them to whatever waits beyond. This painting was like those, except the medium seemed different. If those had been painted with smoke, then these had been done with blood. It was as if someone had opened an artery and sprayed their medium on the canvas, making such beautiful images from something so grisly. It was almost as if he could see a woman in that painting, a woman who, as he stared, beckoned to him to free her, a woman who promised earthly delights if he could only... Detective Moore! "Richard! Earth to Richard, come in! Earth people need you, Rick." It was the name that shook him out. Only one person had ever been allowed to call him Rick, and she was long gone. "Don't call me that. What's with that painting?" Salvatore only shrugged. "Dunno. Can't exactly ask him either, can we?" Richard shook his head, as much to negate the statement as to clear it. "Any idea why he did this?" Richard asked, looking around for anything they might have missed. Salvatore shook his head. "That's why I called you in. Can't figure out what this is, but I was hoping for more insight than your critique on the artwork." Richard sighed, looking around the office. "Then let's get started." Detective Richard sat at his desk, staring at the wall as he tried to make sense of it. Kyle Mann had no particular reason to kill his family and then himself, none that anyone could find. He was a partner at his law firm. He was getting ready to win the biggest case of his career, and he and his family had just bought tickets on a 2-week cruise after the case wrapped up. He took the bus because it let him talk to the people and hand out business cards. He had nothing outstanding, debt-wise, besides his mortgage, which was taken care of every month like clockwork. He wasn't under any undue stress, so it seemed, and his life appeared to be going pretty well. The firm he worked for said he hadn't seemed different, maybe a little distracted, but anyone would be with a caseload like he had. Richard wasn't thinking about the case as much as he should have been, however. What he was thinking about was that painting. As he stared at the wall, he could see the painting hanging there. It was so real that he imagined he could almost reach out and touch it. The woman was still there, calling to him, begging him to release her. But Richard didn't know how. Richard didn't understand why he kept going back to that picture. And when someone came in and bumped his desk, he jumped like he'd been using his work computer for porn or something. "Figured you'd have gone home by now," Salvatore said, pulling up a chair next to his desk. Richard snorted. "Someone's got to pull your ass out of the fire. Found anything useful?" Salvatore gave him a weird look. "Not about man, but I may have something else. You remember the Triddle case about 8 months ago?" Richard thought for a moment before slowly nodding. "Yeah, art dealer. He killed himself, didn't he?" "Correct," Salvatore said. "I only thought of it because it was one of my first cases. They suspected foul play, remember, because there were rumors he was fencing stolen art. Well, I also remember that painting we saw in Man's office." He pulled a picture out of a file folder he had tossed onto his desk. Sure enough, there it was. It was hanging in the art dealer's office, in a place of prominence, very close to where the little man had ended his art-dealing career. "Do you suspect that someone might be killing the people who own that picture?" Salvatore shrugged. "No, but it's a hell of a coincidence. Triddle didn't have a family, but he did have a cat. Right before he ended himself, he broke its neck and left it in the adjoining office. I remember the landlady going on and on about how sad it was. She said he had loved that cat. He had raised it since he found it in the dumpster out behind the office when it was a kitten, and she couldn't see him hurting it. Kinda lends some credence to someone else having done it," Richard speculated. "If someone did, then they covered their tracks well. The only person in that office was Triddle, and Man is the only one with prints on the gun and with witnesses to say that he was the only one in or out." Richard sighed, getting up as he tried to shake off the phantom painting that had been hanging on the wall across from him. "Did we take that painting into evidence?" Salvatore looked at some notes and shook his head. "No, didn't seem pertinent at the time. Let's bring it in and bag it as evidence, just to be safe. You said there might be a link, so let's cover our bases. I'm gonna head home for the night. It's been a hell of a day." "Sleep well, boss. I'll go get it personally and put it into evidence, though I'm not sure what it's evidence of." Richard didn't either, but he knew he would feel better if it were here at the station. He would feel better if he was able to touch it and look at it and study it a little better too. Richard slumped in his desk the next day. The coffee wasn't doing it for him today, and he had slept badly. He had dreamed about that painting, the woman inside begging him to help her. She had cried out to him again and again, begging for his help. But he couldn't say how he was supposed to help. He would wake up and see that painting across from his bed, sitting on the open piece of wall and staring at him. "Morning, boss," Salvatore said, coming to take up the seat from the night before and looking well rested for someone who had likely gotten to bed around midnight. "Anything new?" Richard barked, not even looking up. "Nothing on Man. The chief has decided that's an open and shut case, but I have found something new about that painting if you're interested." Richard shrugged. "I got time, I guess." What he really wanted was a nap, but he didn't see that happening. Subconsciously, what he also wanted was to go down to evidence and look at that painting. Even from here, he could hear it calling to him. That painting, called The Mind of an Artist, was the last known work of Roland de Priest. It was supposed to be in police custody, but it disappeared about 4 years ago from lockup. Triddle and Mann are not the only two odd murders it's been at the scene of either. In 4 years it's been circulating, it's been photographed in the background of at least 3 other murders that have taken place under strange circumstances. In 2022, Frank Joffus killed his daughter, her babysitter, and then himself. Joffus's ex-wife said that he'd been acting strangely, but the statement never went anywhere. In February of 2023, Glenda Moffat killed herself and her elderly mother one evening. Witnesses said they had always been close, and they couldn't imagine why she would do such a thing like that. Like in the Triddle case, she poisoned her mother's 4 cats too, so there's that. And in December of 2023, Hadrian Moe killed his boyfriend and their dog before killing himself as well. Their neighbors said that Marcus Smith, the boyfriend in question, had confided to some of them that Hadrian had been very quiet lately, and that he'd taken to staying in the second bedroom, his art studio, for days on end, with some painting that he had recently purchased. Richard was trying to put it all together, but his mind kept slipping back to that painting. The painting, the goddamn painting. "What's your point?" Richard asked, and Salvatore looked at him like he was losing it. "My point is that you were right. The painting does need to be in police custody. It's been at the scene of at least 5 deaths. That can't be a coincidence. We need to..." But Richard was standing up. "The only thing I need to do is get a nap. I'm not thinking straight today. If the chief says that the Mann case is closed, then it's closed. I'm sure you have other cases to go get to." Salvatore watched him leave, but Richard wasn't going home. He went down to evidence lockup, flashed his badge, and went to check on the evidence for the Mann case. "I thought that case was closed," the evidence sergeant said, but Richard just shrugged. "I just need to look at something. Some evidence wasn't adding up." He sat in the evidence room and held the picture in the bag, looking at it. It was so beautiful, so very alive, and it took every ounce of control not to rip it from the bag. It called to him. It begged him to free it, but he didn't dare. The woman inside was so small, so fragile, and when she laid her hand against the outside of the picture, Richard felt himself grow weak. "You know what must be done, Rick." He nearly dropped it. No one had called him Rick. No one had been allowed to since his mother died. "You know what must be done." He did. He did know. His phone buzzed, and he nearly didn't pick it up. Something in him, though, reminded him that he still had responsibilities, that he needed to remain as normal as possible until the time came. "Detective Moore." "Richard!" It was Salvatore, not a surprise. "Richard, the painting is gone." "Is it?" Richard asked, putting the phone against his ear as he got the angle just right. "Do they know how?" There was silence on the other end for a moment, and Richard was worried he had lost the connection before Salvatore came back. No, they don't. Listen, Richard, this painting may not just be evidence." Richard stopped, the nail poised to accept his offering. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this painting may somehow be causing the incidents." Richard set the painting on the nail, smiling as it hung lovingly from the spot right across from his bed. "That's a bold claim, Salvatore. Do you have any proof?" Richard could hear street sounds in the background, the sound of a car being driven. "It took some doing, but it seems it's been linked to 14 murders since its disappearance. Well, not linked, but present at them. I think it's got something spooky going on, and now it's missing again." Richard took a seat, admiring his handiwork. "And you called to tell me all that?" "No," Salvatore said. "I called to ask you why you did it." Richard smiled. "The woman in the painting needs to be freed, Detective Salvatore. She needs to be free, and the only way to do it is with blood." If it didn't work for the last 14, what makes you think it'll work now? Come on, Richard, don't do anything stupid. I can assume that you'll come into my house, Richard said, taking the gun out of the holster in the side of his chair and working the slide. Richard, Jan and Margaret didn't do anything to deserve this. Just let them go. Drive fast, Salvatore. If you do, you might be in time to save one of them. Rick! But Richard hung up the phone. He had more important things to do. Salvatore was the first one on the scene. Janice and Margaret were already dead. He found them downstairs. They'd been done in the kitchen, dinner slowly burning in the stove. He had gotten at least one of them unaware, but Margaret looked like she had died screaming. He heard the shot and looked to the ceiling. He already knew what he'd find. Richard was dead, single shot to the head. Salvatore called it in, but he took that painting and burned it before anyone got there. He could hear it calling to him the whole time, but Salvatore knew the trick and wouldn't be drawn in. Roland DePriest wasn't going to kill anyone else, not in death, and Detective Salvatore intended to make sure of it. Detective Richard Moore and his family would be the last of his little art pieces. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.